At least half of the goals you've set in your life have failed, and deep down you know it, not because you're weak, not because you're lazy, but because you were using the wrong system from the start. Most people set goals like they're making a wish, they write a few sentences, feel a little spark of motivation, and then hope the universe rewards their good intentions. But hope isn't a strategy. And in the field, whether that's business, relationships, or a battlefield, hope gets people hurt. In the teams, we had a saying, your plan fails long before the mission does, and that's exactly what's happening to you right now. You're trying to build discipline with methods that crumble under the first hint of pressure. You're trying to stay motivated when the world throws cold water in your face. But I'm going to give you the one goal setting method that never failed me, not in buds, not in combat, not in the darkest, coldest nights when everything in my body told me to quit. It's simple, it's uncomfortable, and once you learn it, you'll wonder why nobody else ever taught you this. Before we get any deeper, I want you to do something for me. Put your phone face down, turn off notifications, stop scrolling. If you can't do that, click off now. Seriously, this is your first test. Because if you can't eliminate a distraction for 60 seconds, you're not ready for the method I'm about to give you. The teams taught me that discipline isn't a mood, it's a filter. Those who can't pass the first filter never make it to the mission brief. If you're still here, good. Now we can move forward. My name is John. I'm an ex-Navy SEAL. I spent over a decade in the world's most elite special operations force, and during that time, I learned something that most civilians never understand. Goals don't fail because people aren't motivated. Goals fail because people never learned how to set a mission. In the military, we didn't hope we'd complete an objective. We built a strategy that made failure almost impossible. I'm not here to give you self-help fluff or motivational speeches. I'm here to give you the same battlefield-tested framework I use in my own life every single day. If you follow what I'm about to teach for just 7 days, you will feel more clarity and control than you've had in years. I'll stake my name on that. Here's how this is going to work. The strategy I'm going to teach you has 3 parts: what I call the mission lock-in, the immediate threat scan, and the non-negotiable execution window. These aren't fancy names for basic ideas. These are the same mental systems I used when the margin for error was measured in seconds, not seasons. You and I are going to walk through each step, and by the time we're done, you're going to know exactly how to build a goal the same way we built missions: lean, focused, pressure tested, and impossible to back out of. And before we move into the main briefing, I want you to check in with me. In the comments, write one goal you failed at this year. Don't sugarcoat it. Put it out there. Consider it your official mission declaration. Now lock in, breathe, focus. We're going into the first step. Most people don't notice the moment their goal begins to die. It doesn't happen in some dramatic explosion. It happens quietly, almost politely, like a small crack forming in the hull of a ship, a missed alarm, a skipped workout, a soft promise to get back on track tomorrow. Civilians think the collapse happens suddenly, but it never does. It begins with these tiny fractures, the ones you excuse because they don't feel dangerous yet. But in the teams, we learned that the smallest unnoticed threat is always the one that kills the mission. And when you set a goal, you feel that spark of excitement. You convince yourself this time will be different. You imagine the version of yourself who shows up early, trains harder, focuses deeper, but excitement is the first enemy. It fools you into believing momentum will carry you instead of discipline. And the moment the initial excitement fades, usually around day 3, you're already losing altitude. You start bargaining with yourself. You lower the bar. You switch from I will to I'll try. That's the first sign of incoming fire. And then comes the second trap: vague objectives. Most people set goals like they're trying to describe fog. I want to get in shape. I want to make more money. I want to be more consistent. If I said something that vague on a mission brief, the entire room would stare at me like I'd lost my mind. A vague goal is impossible to execute. You can't hit a target you haven't defined, and yet every day I watch civilians aim at nothing and wonder why they keep missing. But the deadliest trap, the one that kills more goals than anything else, is emotional recoil. This is what happens the moment your brain meets resistance. You try waking up early, but that bed feels warm. You go to the gym, but the workout feels harder than expected. You open your notebook to study, but your mind drifts after 2 minutes. Your brain starts shouting, retreat, 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 and you listen, not because you're weak, but because nobody ever taught you how to override that signal. In the field, that signal gets you killed. In life, it just keeps you small. I remember the first time I felt emotional recoil in a way that scared me. It wasn't during a firefight, it wasn't in some heroic movie style moment. It was during Bud S in the freezing dark of surf torture. I was chest deep in the Pacific, arms linked with the guys beside me, the instructors yelling, the cold cutting straight through the bone. And for a split second, just one, I felt something I had never allowed myself to feel before, the urge to quit, the urge to just stop fighting. That moment taught me a truth civilians never confront. When you're under pressure, your mind will always create an escape hatch. And if you haven't sealed that hatch in advance, you will crawl through it. Not because you want to, but because your brain is wired to avoid discomfort at all costs. This is why your goals collapse. Not because you lack potential, but because you underestimate the speed at which your mind will betray you when the pressure hits. You think the threat is outside, time, money, circumstances, but the first threat is always internal. And unless you build a system that locks you in before the pressure comes, you're already losing. What I learned that night in the surf is the core of the method I'm going to teach you. I didn't know it yet, but a lesson was coming, one that would shape how I set every mission for the rest of my life. You're about to learn it too. But first, you need to understand something even more dangerous than discomfort. What happens when you ignore these early signs? That's where we go next. My face was buried in sand when I realized I might not make it, not in some dramatic movie-style battle, just another night in BUD/S where time didn't feel real anymore. My whole body was shaking from the cold, muscles twitching on their own, eyelids so heavy I wasn't sure they would open again if I closed them. We had just come out of the surf, and the instructors made us hit the ground for another round of sugar cookies. The Pacific was still roaring behind us, and every wave seemed to whisper the same thing: quit, quit, quit. My teeth were chattering so violently I could barely hear the instructions. I remember trying to push myself to my knees, but my arms gave out and I hit the sand face first. The grit scraped across my lips, and I could taste blood mixing with salt water. For a moment, everything went silent inside my head. No yelling, no cold, no pain, just the feeling of sinking into a place I'd never been before. A place where quitting didn't sound like failure, it sounded like relief. That scared me more than anything. We were deep into Hell Week. Sleep deprivation was so severe that half the class was hallucinating. Some were talking to invisible people. One guy tried to walk across the water because he swore there was a bridge. And me? I was barely holding on to the idea of myself. My mind was doing the math. If I ring that bell, the pain ends right now. One step, one decision, one whisper of surrender. I pushed myself up again, hands trembling, sand glued to my skin like cement. The instructors paced back and forth, silhouettes against the floodlights, barking orders that cut through the night like blades. And then one of them stopped beside me. He crouched down, looked me dead in the eyes, and said something I'll never forget. Your body is done, John. Everyone can see that, but your mission isn't. And until you define the mission, your mind will always try to escape. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't taunting. He was calm, too calm for the chaos around us. And in that moment, something clicked. I had been fighting the cold, the exhaustion, the waves, the pain, but I didn't have a target. I didn't have a mission. I was just trying to survive the night. And that kind of goal dissolves the moment the suffering gets real. The instructor leaned closer and said, "If you don't choose the mission, the pain will choose it for you." Those words hit harder than the ocean ever could. It was the first spark of the method I would later refine and use for every goal in my life. I didn't understand the full lesson yet, but I felt something shift, a thin line of clarity cutting through all that chaos. I remember drawing a single breath, slow, shaky, but intentional. And instead of thinking about making it to sunrise or surviving the hour or even the next evolution, I locked onto one mission: get to your feet. That was it. One clear, measurable, immediate objective. Not emotional, not vague, not heroic. Just a mission I could execute. I dug my hands into the sand, pushed through the shaking, and forced myself upright. The cold didn't vanish, but it stopped owning me. The exhaustion didn't fade, but it stopped steering me. For the first time that night, my brain didn't search for an escape hatch. It focused. It obeyed. And standing there, barely holding myself together, I realized something that would change the way I approached every challenge for the rest of my life. The moment you give your mind a precise mission, the fear loses its teeth. I didn't know it then, but that tiny shift, the smallest seed planted in the middle of the darkest night, would grow into the one goal-setting method that has never failed me. And the moment I tested it under real pressure, everything changed. The first time I realized the method wasn't just some trick to survive training, but a weapon I could rely on, was during a night operation that went sideways fast. We were moving through a coastal village overseas, moonlight barely cutting through the haze, and everything felt wrong from the moment we stepped off the boats. The air was too still, the dogs weren't barking, even the wind seemed to be holding its breath. When you've been in the field long enough, your body recognizes danger before your brain does, and mine was screaming. We were halfway to our objective when the first shot cracked in the distance, then another, then the radio lit up. Elements of our team had made contact, and the situation was deteriorating faster than we could adjust. The plan that had looked so clean in the briefing room was now unraveling in front of us. Civilians panic in moments like that. They freeze, they hesitate, they drown in adrenaline and fear, but this was exactly where the method revealed its teeth. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my fingertips. Sweat blurred my vision. Somewhere deep inside, the old instinct, the emotional recoil, was waking up. Pull back, get safe, retreat. But I had already sealed that escape hatch long before we stepped off. The mission was locked. Not the whole operation, not the big objective, just the immediate target directly in front of me. And when you do that, the chaos around you shrinks. It becomes quiet, sharp, almost simple. We pushed forward, closing the distance to the first contact point. As we moved through a narrow corridor between two buildings, an explosion went off behind us, close enough to rattle my teeth. Dust filled the air, and for a few seconds, I couldn't hear anything except the ringing in my ears. My legs buckled, and I dropped to a knee. Fear surged up, hot and blinding. That's the moment most people break, not because they're cowards, but because their mind floods with 100 different questions. What if I get hit? What if we're outnumbered? What if the mission fails? What if I fail? But those questions dissolve when your mind has a mission it cannot negotiate with. Mine was simple: stand up, move forward 3 steps, cover the team. That was it. Not bravery, not heroics, not some Hollywood speech running through my head, just one mission. And because it was clear, my mind obeyed. My fear didn't disappear, but it lost its authority. I stood, pushed ahead, and took position at the corner of the building. Tracer rounds sliced past in streaks of red light. The air smelled like burning concrete. My hands were shaking, but they were steady enough to do what needed to be done. One of my teammates called out a direction, and I didn't hesitate. I couldn't. The next mission was already locked. Move to cover, then identify the shooter, then suppress. Each micro mission pulled me forward like rungs on a ladder, one I couldn't fall from as long as I kept climbing. And that's when something happened that I didn't expect, not during training, not during Hell Week, not even during the worst missions we ever ran. I stopped feeling overwhelmed. I stopped drowning in the noise. Fear was still there, yes, but it was behind a wall, muffled, distant, irrelevant. What replaced it wasn't courage, it was clarity. We eventually pushed through, neutralized the threat, and secured the area. By the time the chaos settled and I could finally breathe again, I felt something I'd never felt before: control. Not over the world, not over the mission or the enemy or the environment, but over myself, over my own mind, over the part of me that used to panic when the pressure spiked. And walking back toward the extraction point, legs heavy, adrenaline fading, I realized the truth that would become the backbone of my entire philosophy. The moment your mission becomes non-negotiable, your excuses stop existing. That night proved something training had only hinted at. The method wasn't theory. It wasn't luck. It wasn't motivation. It worked under fire, literally. And if it could keep me steady in a gunfight, it could keep anyone steady in their daily battles. But the real transformation doesn't happen on the battlefield. It happens when you bring this method into ordinary life. That's where everything changes. Most people think their lives are too chaotic, too stressful, or too ordinary to use a method born on the battlefield. But the truth is, civilians face pressure every single day that feels just as overwhelming, just without the gunfire. I've met entrepreneurs drowning in responsibilities, parents stretched thin between work and home, older adults trying to rebuild strength or purpose, students who panic the second the workload piles up. Different environments, same human wiring, and the same trap: vague goals, emotional recoil, and a mind looking for escape hatches. Let me show you how this plays out in the real world, because this method isn't about being a warrior. It's about being in control of yourself when the world demands more than you think you can give. I once talked to a young entrepreneur who told me he felt like he was running in 10 directions at once. Every morning, he'd make a long list of tasks, feel motivated for about 10 minutes, and then the chaos would swallow him. Emails, deadlines, unexpected problems. By lunchtime, he judged his entire self-worth through the lens of that failing list. I asked him a simple question: what's the mission right now? He couldn't answer, because like most people, he was trying to complete a campaign, not a mission. So I told him to pick one micro target, reply to the 2 emails that mattered most. Not the whole inbox, not the ideal perfect workflow, just two. He looked at me like it was too simple to matter, but the moment he finished those two emails, something changed in his posture, like a knot had loosened inside him. With a defined mission, he didn't freeze. He didn't drown, he executed, and execution creates motion. By the end of the week, he told me it felt like someone had turned all the noise down. Then there was a single mother I worked with during a community program, raising two kids, juggling shifts, and feeling like she was failing on all fronts. She wanted to get her life together, but that kind of goal is a mountain with no footholds. You can't climb that. You just stare at it until it crushes your spirit. So instead, she picked one mission: pack healthy lunches the night before. That's it. One foothold, one measurable, executable action. After 2 weeks, she told me something that hit me hard. It doesn't feel like I'm failing anymore. Her life hadn't magically become easier, but she wasn't collapsing under the weight of impossibly big expectations. She had structure, she had clarity, and clarity is a form of strength. Older adults experience a different kind of pressure, the pressure of time, fatigue, or the fear of decline. I once spoke with a man in his 70s who wanted to get stronger again, but every time he tried to start an exercise routine, the pain in his knees shut him down. Emotional recoil, the same reflex I felt in the surf, just quieter. So we chose missions so small they felt almost laughable. Stand up from a chair 5 times, then 3 deep breaths while standing tall, then a 2-minute walk. Within a month, he wasn't just exercising, he was leading a walking group at his senior center. Students feel the pressure differently. One college student told me he would stare at assignments until anxiety crushed him. He wasn't lazy, he was locked inside a mental firefight without a plan. So we broke it into missions: open the laptop, write 2 sentences, not 2 pages, 2 sentences. And the moment he stopped negotiating with the fear and started executing missions, the panic faded. Not because the work was easier, but because the mission gave his brain something precise to obey. Here's the SEAL level truth civilians never hear: discipline isn't about grinding harder, it's about reducing the battlefield until victory is inevitable. Most people fight on every front at once. That's why they lose. Warriors and successful civilians fight one mission at a time, clear, non negotiable, executed without hesitation. And when you start living this way, something shifts inside you. You stop waking up defeated. You stop drowning in pressure. You stop believing you're not disciplined enough or not motivated enough. You realize discipline isn't a personality trait, it's a system you control. The transformation is real. I've seen it in boardrooms, living rooms, classrooms, and retirement homes. I've seen people who were breaking under their own expectations become unstoppable once they learned how to set missions instead of wishes. And now you understand how civilians use the method. But to finish this, you need one final piece: the aftermath, the part nobody talks about, the part that determines whether you keep this weapon sharp or let it rust. That's where we go next. The sun was barely coming up when I sat down at my kitchen table again, the same place where we started this journey. The house was quiet in that early morning way that feels almost fragile, like the world hasn't decided what it's going to be yet. My coffee was steaming, the air was still, and for a moment, it reminded me of those rare seconds in the teams when everything went silent before the storm. Except this time, the storm wasn't enemy fire or the freezing Pacific. It was life, bills, work, relationships, pressure, the endless list of things civilians tell themselves they'll try to do differently tomorrow. But sitting there, watching the first light spread across the countertop, the silence didn't feel empty anymore. It felt sharp, directed. It felt like a briefing room, because once you understand what you've learned, once you stop relying on motivation and start relying on mission, your mornings stop being random moments. They become checkpoints, recalibrations, quiet reminders of who you said you were going to be. Most people never reach this point. They start strong for a day or two, maybe 3, and then life hits them from the side. The kids get sick, work piles up, stress builds, the bed feels warm, the brain whispers, "It's okay, you can skip today." And they listen, not because they're weak, but because they never locked into a mission. They were trying to ride a feeling, and feelings are the least reliable currency in human history. Motivation is a spark, mission is the fuse. Only one leads to an explosion. As I sat there, I thought about all the times in my life when I had tried to rely on motivation. Times before the teams when I'd write ambitious goals in a notebook, promising myself I'd stick to them, only to watch them dissolve under the first hint of discomfort. Back then, I thought discipline was about willpower. I thought the men who made it through buds were born with something I didn't have. What I didn't know was that discipline was a formula, a strategy the instructors had drilled into us over and over again, disguised inside every evolution, every moment of pressure, every crisis we faced. You now understand the first part of that strategy. The mission must always be clear, always be immediate, and always be non negotiable. Once you lock onto it, the fear, the hesitation, the excuses, they all weaken. Not because the world gets easier, but because your mind stops searching for the exit route. But there's something else I haven't told you yet, something just as important, something that separates the guys who barely survive the mission from the ones who dominate it. As I looked down at the table, fingers wrapped around the warm mug, I felt the weight of that second method, the one the instructors didn't explain out loud, the one you only learn when you're pushed to the absolute breaking point. Most civilians never hear about it. Most SEAL candidates never learn it, but it's the reason the strongest warriors in the world never burn out, never fall apart, and never get lost in the chaos. It's the reason they know exactly what to do when everyone else is panicking. It's the reason they can execute when their body is destroyed and their mind is screaming for mercy. It's the method that turns missions into momentum and momentum into identity. If the mission method is what keeps you from breaking, this next method is what turns you into someone who cannot be broken. We'll go into that in the next video. You're not ready for it yet, but you will be. The mission isn't over, it's just beginning.